Welcome, Kelly and Perry. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having us.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll sort of open this conversation to set the tone and the direction of it. Kelly, you first.
Okay, all right. My background starts when I was 5 years old, when I was absconded by the Illuminati. And I was with my stepmother my single mother at the time. And so we were brought into this underground tunnel system where the Illuminati were practicing their dark arts. And my mother and I were pretty much stuck there for about a week. And my stepfather, who did not know us yet, got a remote viewing. He was a medium of a being called Moda. And he was here on a very specific mission as his incarnation. And he came and got a remote viewing of us and came and got us out of the dark arts, got us out of the training. So I've had exposure to how they train beings, humans, as well as souls, so that they can do the soul harvest and suck power out of our souls. So my dad got us out of the situation and protected us from that day forward, and that's when my training started, to be able to learn how to read the dark arts, how they operate, how they've created this matrix that keeps us from accessing our sovereignty and sacred love.
Whoa, that's quite a way to start your life out.
Yeah, it was quite something.
Well, Perry, how about you?
Let's see. How do I encapsulate it? Generally speaking, I was just I was brought up in very orthodox, strict religion, parochial schools, rebelled in my college years, became a hippie and an anti-war activist, did a lot of work at those times with hallucinogens of different sorts, moved on from there to Eastern religion in India and meditation practices, contemplative practices, on from there into shamanism, entheogens, and all the while studying the different divinatory arts, tarot, Kabbalah, palm reading, astrology. Did a lot of explorations and continued to use a lot of the language that I learned over those studies. Now my focus is more on presence, on magic, what I would call 5D magic, pure intention, no agendas, ceremonial states, sacred space, and trying to be helpful here in this changing time.
All right. Well, it sounds like you've been busy up to this point.
Yeah, I can't stop.
Well, how I would like for this to go is, as I look around in the world, it seems like there is several camps of how to look at what we're going through. One are the quote-unquote spiritual positive thinkers. And with them, you can't even discuss what I want to talk about with you. And it's a matter of, I very seldom quote from Middle Eastern quotes, but they say, believe in Allah, but tie up your camel first. There is a balance here. It seems like we're looking for a new way of thinking, a new consciousness to even grasp what I think we're going to get into here. And it has to do with holding the light, but paying attention too. I remember June Ballo talking about the fact that you can't start from the highest chakra. You have to start from the root chakra, where all of the darkness is, and transform that and work your way up. And it's not an easy task. And where this comes in is with ETs and extraterrestrials, and talking with people like David Icke, with the reptilians and the Illuminati. There is a very dark side to what's happening, and I think we would be remiss as spiritual beings coming into our full power to just ignore it or pretend like it's not there. And the danger of I see what's happening is that as people even people that are letting go of religious beliefs and their idealism and their nationalism and starting to think about extraterrestrials, it's becoming another religion based not on fact or experience, but on wishful thinking with the same template as the religion they just gave up. So I'll just leave it there and tell me what you think.
This is your specialty, really.
Oh, well, I agree with you, Rahasya. There's one of the pitfalls that I see in the New Age, and this is a funny term, New Age, and it covers too many variations, as you noted. The different types of approaches to this whole idea of consciousness and the ascension, for instance, and ultimates of any kind spiritually. What I'm finding and what I have been emphasizing, Kelly and I have both worked with this a lot, is collapsing the time model into a spherical model of accepting and embracing all parts of duality instead of shunning it and trying to rise above it in that classic ascent model, which you will see in most of the world religions today. Ascent models do a fair amount of denial of their human, emotional, and sensual selves, and we have found that is its own kind of trap in the way that it splits people in two and pits them against their own bodies and their own humanity. So a lot of what I do is spend a lot of time owning my own 4D nature, my 3D and 4D nature, and encouraging people to find the innocence in those agreements that we make with our 4D selves. We like to point the finger outside of ourselves at enemies and bad guys. Instead, what we should be doing is seeing that we're all part of one soul family and that we know what it means to be on that side of the duality as well, but we chose to forget about it. If we can embrace more that this is one, that there is unity, if we can embrace more, in my opinion, our own 4D natures and stop fighting them, I believe that we will find the peace that we're looking for in the spherical center of now and in the present, and I believe that's where all miracles start.
Mm-hmm. And what I've experienced is that awareness, because I left my path after being indoctrinated, through this intense training my whole childhood of understanding the dark and where they are, how they work, why they do what they do, how they do it. And it was a very intense childhood. I was too young, really. I was innocent, and it was a lot to take in, so I left my path. And for about 10, 15 years, I did this corporate job, this corporate life, and I pretended that the dark didn't exist. I didn't want to know. I wanted to just assume that there's just light and pretend like it's all just been made up so that I could just feel free and ignore it. And that awareness, when I chose out of the amnesia, that's how I claimed my sovereignty back from the dark. Because if we ignore it and we're not aware of it, that's how we're vulnerable to it. If we're aware of them and we accept that they exist, we understand how they work, and then we understand how to claim our immunity from the dark forces, the only way to do that is to perceive reality through a non-dual perspective. And the fifth dimension, for example, is the first non-dual plane where we will be experiencing that, where we're not going to be perceiving the good and the bad and the evil and the we're really all one family. And when I'm all the way home on the what I could call the 13th dimension, where we are all one being, and including Jehovah, including these dark ones, our souls are all interwoven together as one being. We're all family. And this Earth project includes all of the ETs. It includes Jehovah. It includes the dark ones. And they created this pocket of chaos so souls could come in and incarnate and experience their souls without this connection to source. They needed to experience this, and so they co-created this pocket of chaos in the universe for us to have this experience. And so for right now, presence includes this awareness. We perceive this whole game as something that we created together, and to practice presence within it is awakening. The ascension is the awakening. We're awakening in the ascension right now because it's happening now through our awakening. And as we awaken inside of the belly of the beast, that is strengthening and making our souls lean. And this is what we came to do, and it's why we chose to incarnate here. So if we can see it as a gift rather than a threat, then we all progress together.
Yeah, I know in my life, I've been in a lot of situations where it's been an adventure. And I've noticed the people that were with me was gung-ho for the adventure, but some of them were petrified. And what changed the whole thing was fear. The level of fear, as it went up, the level of adventure went down.
Yes.
And my existence is an adventure. You know, I really don't have a whole lot of fear. I have concerns, you know, like I think anybody would. But I think one of the things we have to do is really transform fear to open up. Even now, like talking to you two, I feel something in my chest area. And this has only been happening, I would say, the last 2 years of my life. It's not, I'm not sitting here constantly thinking about the next thing to say. I'm just listening to what you're saying without thought. And then my heart comes in and does something that comes up as thoughts and words. And that's new for me because I've always been a mental case, as they would say, you know. But this has been a nice transition for me.
Yes, it's a powerful frequency when we're not letting fear consume our emotions. And you can fine-tune it and turn it right into an adventure, like you said. And so if you can imagine at the top of a roller coaster, and you can either panic and go right into the fear, or you can turn it right into an excitement and enthrallment. And so this is really the waves that we're surfing right now. These transformational waves is creating a lot of change within ourselves where we're excavating all of these fears so that they can come out and be released. And that is the surfing of the waves so that we can be aligned with the frequency of love. And that is the frequency of sovereignty. And it's untouchable. It's invulnerable.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me, I was watching this little comic strip, and it was these two guys that jumped off of a cliff. And halfway down, one of them is saying, "I'm panicking." And the other one says, "Well, the time to panic was before we jumped."
That's a good one.
And it seems like we are in a free fall into a new dimension, a new awakening. And these are exciting times, but precarious. And they're not going to come without challenges. And I think it's important to have these discussions and wake people up to the fact that, yes, this is an adventure. It's great. But even in chaos theory, any scientist will tell you, when you go from one system to another system, that intervening time of chaos can really look chaotic.
Yeah.
But deeply embedded within that chaos, I remember I was talking with Bruce Lipton, and he says one way to look at it is we have our caterpillar life, our caterpillar existence, and we're trying to get to a butterfly. And we use this analogy for a lot of spiritual transformation, but what we don't pay attention to is the intervening time of the cocoon. Because once the caterpillar has devoured its environment, if it was left to be a caterpillar forever, it would just destroy the world. It would just blow up. But for some unknown reason, it finds some place to hang upside down and spin a cocoon. And inside the cocoon, it just turns into a chaotic mess. But he says, biologists know now that if you look very closely to that chaos, there are certain cells. He says we call them imaginative cells. And I think we would call them visionaries. But those imaginative cells are picking up some kind of a frequency, a sacred emerging pattern that all of that chaos starts organizing itself around those cells and becomes a butterfly. And I think that's where we're at today. We have to learn to listen to the imaginative cells, our visionaries, our channelers, but it takes discernment because there's so much misconception and misinformation out there.
Yes, and I liken that metaphor to when this happens in the cocoon, it's one substance. That oneness is implied in that, and when we can remember that we're one being and we're merging together, and our frequency is weaving together. We're all family, and we're weaving together, and we are creating this ascension and this awakening together.
So, do you ever have any doubts, either one of you, about? Okay, let me put it this way: like the things that we're talking about, we can't say, here's what I'm talking about, and hold it out in a material form. We're talking about really etheric, multidimensional ideas that are difficult to grasp. And I know some of my ideas that I feel like I've even had an experience with. Sometimes I have doubts. Do you ever have a doubt? And if you do, what do you do about it?
That's a good question. Would you?
Well, when I think about doubts, I think about what am I doing, and how should I do it, and what's worth doing, and who am I, and all of those question marks that jump up. I guess you could say that examination of that unknowingness could be called a doubt. But I have no doubts that I'm part of an amazing coherence. No matter what I know of the intricacies of me, I know the coherence knows a level of order that I only aspire to know. But in that aspiration to know the coherence of all life, because the perfection is all around us and inside of us and outside of us, microscopically and telescopically, dimensionally, I know this coherence exists so obviously that to me, I'm just a willing student. When I have a doubt, I just know there's more to learn. I never see it as being the end of anything. I carry a lot of ego structures anymore that need to be an expert. There was a time when I needed that, like a life raft on the sea of chaos, to try to feel like I was significant. But with me, the level of doubt and chaos has left to the degree that I say I cleaned up my ego act. And I don't have a problem with ego. I think that there is a balanced way to be ego and to have and use ego. It's a great tool. What I'm speaking to are the false selves of me, the ones that thought they never would have lived a good life without doing X, Y, or Z before I died. My values, what's right, what's wrong, what has to happen on the planet and my part in it. All these tensioners, I would call them, have a way of pulling us away from our actual basic miraculous nature. So I spend less time, when I have a doubt, I look at who's the doubter more than I worry about it.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the ego thing has been, I think my most difficult thing to overcome with ego was I used to say, I want to wake up. And the most difficult thing to come to realize is the I that was saying that won't be there when I wake up. So it's like trying to get this little kid to help you go on a vacation to this really fun spot, but you can't go. Yeah, that has been, and it sort of reminds me, there's a parable in the Bible about the householder and getting the household in order. There was the gardener's doing the cooking, and the cook is doing the laundry, and everybody's doing everybody's job, and it's in total chaos. And the parable says that you need to find one person in the household that's willing to be the steward, the boss, temporary boss, and give everybody their job, put the household in order, and be ready for when the master knocks at the door to even give up that job as the steward. So I've been in a search trying to find my own ego that's willing to come to grips with this and realize that this is a manifestation of mind for the most part. And I think I've made a deal with it to where its eternal life, if there is such a thing, is going to be in the memory of that projection that projects all of this.
That's exactly it. The way that I deal with, I navigate my life through my connection to Source. When we're incarnate in 3D, we must have a very strong umbilical cord to Source. So I commune with this being through the language of love and appreciation and gratitude, and then I ask questions so I can have a continuous dialogue with what I call source, and then there's source self, which is our higher self, and our fifth dimensional guides or multidimensional guides. And the integrity and the coherence that comes from these beings has eliminated all doubt in my work and what I understand, because the integrity and the clarity that comes from my understanding of what they're helping me understand, and they help me remember where I came from, how I've been trained to do exactly what I'm doing, and they awaken my awareness beyond the ego. My self-perception has gone from a physical being to personality, from ego self to a broader aspect of self, which is the oversoul of self, and the individuated soul self that I chose to incarnate as here. And within that frequency is this integrity that has so much coherence in it, and I navigate my life through that coherence, and I don't make any, I can't say that I don't make any mistakes, but I walk doubtlessly on my path. It cultivates confidence in what I do, and it has never steered me wrong. It has created my life has come to what it has as a fulfilling experience of existing here because of that guidance and that coherence.
Yeah, sometimes the realization of what you're saying comes with age, experience, and the ability to look back. Like right now, our life is a little precarious where we live. I don't know exactly how long we can live here. And with my old mind, if I looked forward, it would seem a little scary, to lack of words. But with my hindsight and my age, I've learned that everything always works out. So I keep pulling myself back into my center and my moment, and realize that this is the only moment I really need to be concerned with, because this is the only moment there is. Of course, then my mind goes, what the hell are you talking about? You know, but I feel this is where this feeling I'm talking about is becoming more important. My heart chakra opening up, possibly even my biological heart, you know, tuning into this, because when I go there's an assuredness, a knowingness that I can't get here.
Right. Yes, to me it's my connection to source, and having a personal relationship with that which created us is the way I access that. And then that communication always comes from my heart and through my heart, because it is inside of us. It's not outside of us. It's not in a cloud somewhere. It's actually that being which never left us, because it loves us so much. It would never leave us. It never has, and it never will. It's inside. It's when we slow down enough, and rather than meditate and just sit in silence, to create a dialogue with that being that loves us, and we can get clarity and guidance from that being, and that there's so much safety and comfort and love in that relationship. And this is what's been taken from us by the Matrix. This is what religion was all about, was to cut our source off, to cut our umbilical cord off from source. And now that's up to us to claim back, take back that contact, and claim back that relationship and cultivate it. It's really what's gotten me through all the difficult times in my life.
Yeah, it's funny too. I hear Christians talk about that's the way, that's the light, and all that. But you know, if they would just read the Bible, it would clear up a lot. Like the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talks about the fact that he says, "Beware, because what's growing out of my teaching right now is meant to confound and confuse you, and it's not the way." And he said, this is the early synagogues and the Baptists and all that evolved into what we have today. And it is such a confusing, divisive, maddening mess that as people are waking up, they start seeing that and just stop going to church to begin with. But then as things evolve, we actually start getting resistance towards that. And I know, I wrote my book, and that book was a little bit of a cathartic release for me. Like if I would rewrite that book now, it would have a lot more compassion and love and less judgment, you know. But, that's writing that book helped me get to that point.
So true.
What could I say? My own book helped me.
I love that book because not many people dared to be inflamed and infuriated. Not to say that you were that overt in your anger in the book, but it was refreshing because so many people are too careful at protecting the status quo because they're afraid they'll hurt someone's feelings. The fact is that we've all been hurt immeasurably by all this indoctrination over the many centuries and by the few who have taken power over the rest of us. Yeah. So I'm really refreshed by your book, and I also am glad to hear what you've learned through the process. I believe it actually was a healing thing for you and probably for a lot of people who read it.
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of positive feedback, especially from women, because during the research for that book, I started first realizing on a mental level what our patriarchal organizations and society has done to women. And on my mind level, I just went, wow, that's pretty screwed up. Mm-hmm. But I tell you, when it hit my heart level, I cried one evening because what in the world are we thinking? What are we doing? Yeah. If we can't even get along with our other part of our humanity, how can we even think about running a planet or ascending to a higher level? Mm-hmm. It was amazing that what I went through just by letting my heart tune into that one aspect.
It's the biggest piece because the divine feminine was kicked out of the Garden of Eden. The divine feminine was the frequency of that. The precious sacred feminine was kicked out of the system and used against us. And after December 21st, the divine feminine is back in charge through the earth being in charge now. The matriarchy is in charge now. And women are nowadays tuning in to that frequency and claiming our sensuality back, claiming sacred love back. This is a really big piece, and Perry and I are now writing together on this. Because how many role models do we have that exemplify sacred love together? A woman feeling her sensuality and feeling safe and sacred in that sensuality, the self-appreciation of her gender. This has been a very hard piece. And so to replace the lack of sacred love in our society, especially in America, but it's really all over the globe, it's even worse in Africa and the Middle East. So to replace that, they're defiling the feminine, massive rape, clitoral circumcision, as well as then in America we have porn and movies to replace the role models of what sacred love could have been. And now look at what we've got. How many relationships do you see out there where there's two people in love with each other and still have passion for each other and creating the practice of sacred love together consciously? It's a lost sacred art, and this is part of what we're doing now as well, is to claim that back.
Exactly, Kelly. And this is what I said in my book. Whatever the powers that be, whoever they are, the two things that they didn't really take into consideration was females waking up and the internet. As long as we can do this and talk about these things, that's going to be the hinge pin that's going to pull the door off the hinges.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, we definitely need to get people, like, we have a lot of women in positions of power, but they're not really in positions of influence yet. We don't quite let them get there, and that's what needs to take place. And this goes for men too. As we balance our feminine out, it's not really, now I'm going to talk from a higher level. It's not really male-female. It's aspects of male-female in us that has to come forth.
Yes, absolutely. And for women to embody their divine feminine, they need to soften their, because what has happened is we've gotten resentful. It's this unconscious resentment that we have towards men because we've been defiled, disrespected. And for us to soften and fully embody the sacred feminine, we need to forgive the whole role of the patriarchy. And that's intense. I've had a lot of intense journeys with that one, and it is very emotional, but it's required for us to forgive so that we're not holding any kind of resentment, so we don't have any power plays together. Because Perry and I were going through this process together with healing the genders within and equalizing, for me to equalize my divine masculine and my divine feminine so that my masculine isn't in charge and trying to protect, try to prove that I'm right or force him into respecting me equally. I had to soften for him to have respect for me. And throughout this softening of my divine masculine, my divine feminine comes through, and then he wants to respect me because it's harmonizing his divine feminine.
Right. Yeah, especially since you are mirrors for each other.
Yes.
And that would allow him to be more into his feminine and soft side, you know, not to have to conflict and combat.
And of course it goes conversely too. The whole we have one of the things that we're writing to right now and developing is what we call restoration of the archetypes. And what that means is re-establishing the divine masculine and divine feminine archetypes so that we have a pattern with which to kind of restore our own misguided, distorted idea of what it means to be masculine or feminine. And what we've both found and have been working with over the last years has been in this kind of sacred love context where you have sacred space going on, that if the masculine is not threatened by the feminine, and if its ego is not in charge, and if the feminine is not angry and betrayed, that there's this kind of give and take that goes back and forth, where a big role for the masculine, for divine masculine, to allow divine feminine to show is to create this respect, to realize that the gifts of divine feminine will not come out until the environment is safe for that to come out. And for that to happen, it can't be, the respect has to be deep, it's got to be real, because women are too intuitive to try to fool.
Yeah, it's you can't do it, huh?
No.
That also comes with the age of retrospect.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think another thing to think about with the feminine is that is a template, and that same template has been overlaid on our organizations, our nations, and it actually is at the basis of slavery and everything else. And this goes way, 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 way back to the early days of the gods, because they're the ones that sort of invented this slavery thing, and even wrote in the early writings how we could beat our slaves, we could take slaves, and of course we have to be careful not to beat them in the mouth or eyes, because, you know, that takes away their value. This all comes from a master-slave relationship that was originally set up, I think, by extraterrestrials, an advanced civilization that came here and pretty much laid the template for this.
Of subservience.
Yep. Yeah, it's been this way ever since. But now as we're waking up and trying to dissolve and dismantle this template, I think the first thing that we've been dissolving are the belief systems that it's created. And now we're starting on the nations. You know, we're starting to see nationalism with a little bit of distaste, because we have this slavery kind of attitude with other nations. It doesn't matter how nice they are, how good they are, but if they have stuff that we want, you know, they're a little bit in danger. I know I was talking to some people in Argentina, and they don't have a whole lot of oil down there. Not, you know, they have some, but they said, we're really glad. You know, we're really glad we don't have natural resources, because, you know, you guys will be coming down here.
Yeah.
And we need to get over this, and this is the oneness that we're talking about, I suppose. I think another thing I'd like to get into, have you gotten into the holographic nature of our reality a little bit? Mm-hmm. You know, it seems like scientists, from the double slit experiment, they've realized that our consciousness interacts with subatomic particles, and some of the more recent experiments says that not only does it interact now, they can set up and design these experiments, and they've noticed that it goes back in time and changes the original experiment, like random event generators and even the double slit experiment. They've done really rigid experiments and research that says our consciousness can go back in time and change results. And some of the really recent, the last few months, the accelerator, they've been trying to find the meaning and source of gravity. And this is also coming out that life is more like a holographic projection than a reality of substance. And if that's the case, then there truly is no out there. It happens in our mind, and it happens in our mind from some kind of a projection coming down, and our mind encapsulating that energy from a holographic dimension, and we actually project that out.
Absolutely.
And perceive it, and then it comes back. And they've even done functional MRIs where they know for sure. Like, for instance, if I hold my hands up and I say, okay, I'm going to alternate, but I'm going to close this hand, then this hand, and randomly. Well, they know from functional MRIs that there's a part of my brain that knows which finger I'm going to close 6 seconds before I close it. So that means that somewhere in the true reality, it's happening before it even gets here. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is something that destabilizes almost everything when you start realizing this, because on this side of the projection, we're really limited on what we can know. And I think that's important to understand, because it's on the other side of the projection we're trying to get and find out who the projectionist is.
Okay, so the way I experience it, the anatomy of the soul, this is in liquid mirror. The anatomy of the soul is like an orb. And within the orb, there's these energy channels. And light is emitting from the center, and this is life force energy. This is your pure identity, your life force energy. This is the life force energy that comes from source. And awareness and presence is within that frequency. Now, the mind are the energy channels. This is where the mind is. Scientists can't find it in the brain. It's in the mind. So we incarnate and we cultivate, we absorb and contaminate our minds through absorbing all of these imprints from the matrix. So lack of self-worth is the main core frequency that keeps us from experiencing this frequency. Now, as life is the mirror of our projection. So our minds are creating our reality. And we have the overall mind where we all agree that this is a tree, this is a plant, this is a table. That's the one true projection that we've all agreed upon. Now within that, we each individually can change our past so that our mind isn't operating from our past. And as we cultivate, like soul retrieval is how we change our past. We can actually change the past through healing our emotional wounds. And then the projection that we create as what we experience as life, the reflection of our soul, becomes more harmonious. And this is the kind of magic that we have available to us now more than ever, because the veils are thinning and the fear is easier to feel and release. And then within that, then we're cultivating our experiences through a satiating experience of creativity and enthrallment with living. And then the projection that we create ends up being more satiating because our relationships become more satiating, because relationships are a reflection of the harmony within the soul, and that's what they're designed for, so that we can understand where our wounds are. So whenever we have conflict in life, that is a red flag to point out when whatever energy is blocking our energy channels that keep us from having a creative access of that free-flowing energy, because we can consciously project the reality that we want.
Yep. Kelly, everything you're saying right now, I'm starting to grasp a little bit, and I'm starting to think that it might be true. But what got me here wasn't believing it or a need to believe it. What got me here was realizing that we have created a reality in 3D dimensional world that is so complex that we're never going to figure it out. Like Einstein said, we're never going to come up with the solutions from the same level that created the problems. Mm-hmm. It's impossible. There's a saying that only drowning sailors can see God. I feel like I was drowning. I feel like there was nothing that I could do on this level the way I was. So this is what's made me reach for what you're talking about. And as I'm reaching, I try to validate each step as I go And I think if I ever do get there, I'll look back and realize, oh, I could have come here just with one easy step. But
no regrets.
Yeah. It's all process. It's all stepping stones, all for this experience of awakening. If we woke up in a snap, it would be boring.
And maybe that's part of the holographic projection. To come here and to make this really real, we would have to forget that it was a projection. Otherwise, it would be sort of meaningless. I mean, it'd be like sitting in your living room playing Nintendo and, not quite really getting into it. And you have to admit, we've gotten into it.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, we're here.
We're
into it.
The thing is that 5D is already here. Harry and I, the work that we do together with our attentions, and we create sacred space, and we cultivate a place to where we can express our love for souls, our love for each other, our love for family, and we create intentions. And every intention that we've created thus far have come true. We are already here in this frequency of the fifth dimensional reality if we claim to have access to it. And then that's where the magic begins, that freedom begins, that exuberant expression and creativity begins there. And it's here, and it's accessible to all that choose to drop into that frequency and that creativity. But first we have to do the groundwork so we don't have the mind and the contaminated mind keeping us from that.
So how much control do you think that the Greys still have as far as siphoning off energy and possibly even fragments of our spirit?
For me, none whatsoever. If we buy into that, then they can. But if we don't buy into that, they can't. And so, yes, I understand that there are beings that aren't aware of how to claim immunity from those beings. And at the same time, there's less and less and less and less and less of that happening.
Yeah. Can I speak a little bit to this, Rahasya? One of the things that there's a couple of really stark differences in the New Age, and one of them is less known than the other. The one that's predominant is another ascent model that looks a lot like Orthodox religions. They've just supplanted the God of the old books with the New Age versions of that, which would be higher intelligences or other dimensional beings or ETs. All of those ascent-oriented version in the New Age has still this projected idea that they live in time, predominantly in time and space. They see themselves as not complete. They see themselves as being unworthy and unfinished. And so they're looking for the missing pieces or waiting for the time when they will get what they need from some other source. Mm-hmm. Contrary to that viewpoint are those that come in here as emissaries from 5D, in which case they're not here to develop along a linear path toward worthiness. They're here to awaken inside of 3 and 4D with and imbue and embody fifth dimensional virtues here. So where we see most people clamoring toward higher ground, we see it as being awakening to something that we already are. And in that awakening process, we find that all the power is right in our consciousness in the present, and that everything that looks like a task before us can be mitigated just through changing our beliefs and our frequency. So we spend more time imagining who we are as 5D beings as an exercise to step into the role of creators. That we are not running one probability here in our lives. We all have agreed on some. There's some main arteries of probabilities here. But you or I or Kelly or anyone who is listening to this can change their entire lives just by changing their viewpoints of what they are as soul, what power they possess as a piece of God itself. If they awaken more to that part of their natures, their lives will seamlessly veer in a different probability line that will exemplify more grace. It'll show a different world than someone else who is still afraid and looking to be saved, creating things out of fear-based ideas and beliefs, cataclysms, catastrophes, death, all of that stuff, it's all built by the operating agents of creativity, which is you, me, and anyone else.
Well, hopefully that's what we're doing right now, is being part of this new creation. Yeah, I'd like to interview you again sometime, and we'll get into the Anunnakis, and that's a whole other aspect of this that would be a total another interview. But before we close this, why don't you tell me about what you're working on right now?
Me? No, you.
Well,
Cooperation, that's what
we're writing together, and we're writing about sacred love. We're writing about how to restore the divine feminine and the divine masculine, how they can work together to access sacred love together, how to create an altar. This is in our last book, Surfing the Transformational Waves of 2012. In the last chapter, it goes into the altar work. Has nothing to do with worship. It has something to do, it's all about having a virtual reality, creating a virtual reality for yourself so you can flip yourself inside out and have a way to practice your love and access your love of existence, your love of source, your love of your family. It's also a way to do a practice recapitulation so we can clean up our relationships, so that we know we take objects that represent family or friends that we might have conflict with, and we restore the relationship through apology and forgiveness. And then what we do together as the practice of sacred love, so that couples can have a way to mend the relationship and mend the relationship between the archetypes, where we're healing the archetypes of the genders.
It sounds like it's going to be an interesting writing.
Oh, it's great fun because it's really on the edge of creativity. Another thing that in this altar work and in the articles that we write, we're really showing ourselves and people, we're exploring and thereby showing others the power of intention when it comes from this pure place in the sacred space. There's a lot of talk about intention, but without a real sacred space where you believe into it, that intention will have varying degrees of effectiveness. So without being too agenda-oriented, we keep the virtues up front and center, and mainly love is the guide of all of it. But we believe, and this is what we write about for all of us, that we are all prototypes of the God that we seek. We all are meshed together with the God self so inextricably that we couldn't separate one from the other. And as those prototypes, as those proxies or co-partners with God, that we really are the agency through which this creativity happens in this world or any other one. So we're just trying to help people to create the life that their hearts demand.
Yeah, and it seems like that's the focus of a lot of people right now. The focus is of service and helping, and even on a biological level, we've noticed that if there's a cell that's sort of sick or low energy, other cells gather around it and vibrate energy into it. And if it's going on a micro level, for sure it should be going on a macro level. And I think that's what we're waking up to, is the fact that we live and breathe and have our being within the body of God, whatever God is. This is an alive universe in which we are a component of, and integrating into it a step at a time. Like we integrate into it with relationships first. That on an atomic level, that would be atoms coming together to form a molecule. But it goes on from there. Molecules form cells, and cells form organisms. And I think as we do this, we're reaching out beyond our individual relationships and building a communal relationship. And that community grows until other communities doing the same thing eventually touch. And then we can overlay the whole thing with, I guess you would call it enlightenment.
Oh, that's beautifully said. Beautiful.
Yep. Well, I think this is what's happening, and conversations like this really help. And I'll leave it with this. I was talking to Barbara Marx Hubbard, and she said one of the most important things about talking like this and putting it out on the internet is because the field the electromagnetic field up there encapsulates all of this. And as this goes up and hits satellites and is being broadcast all over the planet, the field absorbs all of these thoughts, all of these intentions, and feeds into this grid. And every thought we put out there affects every other thought.
Absolutely. Frequency is frequency, and frequency emits, and emotion emits frequency. That is the human translation of energy, and it's the language of the soul. So as we master our emotions, we master our frequency, and that frequency that we emit contributes to the whole. And it's beautiful.
Well,
really.
you two have emitted some really great frequencies today.
Oh, thank you.
As you.
Thank you very much for being here.
Our pleasure.
All right.